Hey there, fellow thrill seekers and believers in the unknown. Ready to dive into the realm of the supernatural? Get ready to be spooked and amazed as I bring you 9 true paranormal ghost stories. Stories that will send shivers down your spine. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, so you won't miss out on any of our spine-tingling adventures. Let's get started, if you dare. It was the sweltering summer of 2011, but the story I'm about to recount feels as fresh in my mind as if it happened just last month. I was in college back then, and for that summer, I was crashing at a house off campus that my fraternity brothers had rented. This place was a hub of youthful energy, a boisterous haven with people constantly coming and going. Raucous parties and blaring music. It was just what you'd expect from a bunch of college-age guys. This house, standing there since 1946, was nothing particularly remarkable. Nestled in a quaint Virginian town steeped in history, it was a Sunday night, and things felt a bit different from the usual chaos. All of my roommates were out of town, leaving me alone for the evening. While it wasn't the first time I'd been alone in a house, it was certainly a rare occurrence. Normally, friends would crash on our couches, and the place would teem with more than the 4 of us. That night, I didn't have any particular plans, so I decided to enjoy a quiet evening with some TV. Around midnight, I turned in for the night. Typically, I had no trouble falling asleep. I'd never experienced sleep paralysis or anything remotely resembling a terrifying nightmare. But that night was different. Sleep eluded me. A peculiar feeling crept over me, a sensation that I was being watched. I went through the motions of checking and rechecking if all the doors were locked and the lights were off. Once I was sure everything was secure, I nestled back into bed. However, what I saw next would haunt me forever. In the dimly lit room, I caught sight of it, a formless black shadow. It resembled the silhouette of a person, but that was all. It was as if darkness had taken shape, casting an eerie outline on the wall behind it. The chill that ran down my spine was undeniable. I couldn't make out any distinct features, but I knew without a doubt that it was watching me. I lay there frozen in fear, unable to move, my mind racing with questions. Was I just working myself into a frenzy? As I contemplated, the wailing sirens of an approaching fire truck and ambulance pierced the night. They were a common occurrence, since our house was located on a road frequently frequented by emergency vehicles. The flashing red lights momentarily lit up my room, revealing that the shadowy figure was still there, undeniably present at the foot of my bed. It wasn't a trick of my imagination. It was something else entirely. Then, it started to move, not exactly walking, but gliding, almost as if on a Segway. It slid slowly and steadily, first from my right, then to my left. When it reached the end of the bed, it turned toward me, its dark, featureless head locked onto me with an unsettling intensity. I can feel the hair on my neck stand on end even now as I write this. As it drew closer, a feeling of dread overwhelmed me. I contemplated screaming, bolting from the room, or simply burying myself under the covers, pretending it was a product of my imagination. But I couldn't muster the courage to do any of these. I knew deep down that this wasn't a trick of my mind. Finally, as it approached, it seemed to lean down, coming dangerously close to my face. The shadowy silhouette remained elusive, never revealing any detail. I shut my eyes tightly, refusing to open them. For what felt like hours, I lay there in petrified stillness, aware of every breath, every heartbeat, every creak of the old house. At some point, I cautiously opened my eyes, uncertain if the figure was still hovering nearby. I was so unnerved that I couldn't trust my senses. With the first rays of dawn, I gathered the courage to leave my bed. I sprinted out of the house, stopping only to grab a shirt and sandals. I didn't return until later when a couple of my roommates were back. I recounted the nightmarish experience to them, but they thought I was either losing my mind or playing a prank on them. It was August, and summer was winding down. I decided to sleep on the living room couch for the remaining time, unable to set foot in that room again. As the days went by, things seemed to return to normal, and life carried on as usual. Then, the following Saturday afternoon, just 6 days after my harrowing encounter, a group of my friends and I were lounging in the living room, engrossed in a TV show, out of the blue. For the 5 individuals, all sporting matching reunion t-shirts, knocked on our door. They explained that this house had once belonged to their family and asked if they could wander through it to reminisce. We thought it was a bit unusual, but we agreed. The visitors were older, with none of them younger than 50, and a couple even in their 70s. They seemed friendly enough, so we returned to our show while they explored the house. My room was adjacent to the living room, and as they passed through the kitchen, one of the elderly ladies pointed at my room. She said, "Oh, I remember that room. It used to be cousin so-and-so's room, but her daddy, my Uncle Clarence, would never set foot in there again. He saw a ghost, and it shook him so much that he avoided that room like the plague." I was utterly flabbergasted. The woman had volunteered this information without any prompting. I hadn't even considered asking if they knew of any strange occurrences in the house. Even my friends were taken aback by her revelation. Now, I was relieved that I had shared my experience with them earlier. I inquired further, wondering if Uncle Clarence was the sort to concoct wild stories for attention. The lady insisted that he was a typical family member, not the type to make up bizarre tales. The confirmation from these unexpected visitors validated the sheer terror I had experienced that fateful night. It wasn't a figment of my imagination. It was something otherworldly, something inexplicable, and it still sends shivers down my spine to this day. About a year and a half ago, my best friend and I embarked on a chilling adventure to my family's farm. It was well past midnight, following our second shift jobs, and a crisp early fall night had settled over the Michigan countryside. We parked by the old barn, which had doubled as a slaughterhouse for the last decade. The farm had been put on the reserve list, preserving it for future generations, but it was now mostly used as a deer camp. As we sat there, just chatting and stargazing, my friend suddenly posed a peculiar question that sent shivers down my spine. He asked if I ever felt that this place had an eerie presence, like we were being watched, as if something terrible had happened here. I chuckled nervously, explaining that all I knew were the stories passed down from my father. My father told me about how, back in the early 30s, when my great-grandpa purchased the farm, it was a massive family project to keep it up and running. Relatives would pitch in with chores and, in exchange, had the privilege to hunt the land for food. One day, my great-grandpa's cousin came over to help and asked for permission to go hunting that night. He set off shortly after sundown. The next morning, my great-grandpa noticed that his cousin's vehicle was still parked in the driveway. Even though he should have left hours ago, it was still dark outside, but my great-grandpa, knowing the lay of the land, set out in that direction. He walked towards the back pasture field, calling out his cousin's name. What he heard in response sent chills down his spine. A voice answered him, but it wasn't his cousin's voice. It was a strange, familiar yet twisted voice, almost like a growl imitating his cousin's voice. My great-grandpa panicked and fled the area, never looking back. When morning light finally broke, he organized a search party with relatives and farm hands to look for his cousin. They found his gun loaded but unused and his hat covered in strange brown liquid spatter. That was all they found. My great-grandpa searched for any sign of him for over 60 years, holding on to hope only when the swamp in the pasture field dried up. Eventually, he gave up, resigned to the mystery of his cousin's disappearance. Almost a decade later, in the 1950s during deer season, another unsettling event took place. By then, my great-grandpa had owned the farm for nearly 20 years, and strange occurrences were not uncommon during a deer hunt. They were joined by a remarkable shot named Joe, a full-blooded Indian whose specific heritage nobody cared to inquire about. Joe was an exceptional marksman, rarely missing a shot, and they were hunting deer in the back pasture. As they pushed through the field, they startled a few deer, and Joe wounded one, tracking it into a largely untouched area of the farm. In this dense underbrush, they stumbled upon a chilling scene. In a small, nearly circular clearing, the remains of a deer were shredded beyond recognition, with blood splattered everywhere. It seemed like something had violently tossed the animal around. Joe, in search of clues, discovered tracks that were unlike anything my grandfather had ever seen. Distorted by the snow, Joe's demeanor shifted, and he grabbed my grandfather, urging him to prepare his gun. As they cautiously approached the mangled deer, they felt an ominous presence. Joe's face was filled with terror as he examined the strange tracks. Suddenly, he stood up abruptly, swearing under his breath. My grandfather saw the fear in Joe's eyes as they retreated from the clearing. During their exit, they sensed something stalking them from just 10 feet away, but they never saw it. Joe refused to reveal what he had seen, only insisting that they should sell the land and never set foot on it again. Over the years, these stories lingered as haunting tales in my family's history. My father, a man of unwavering honesty, recounted his own eerie experience in the late 70s. Shortly before he left for boot camp, one night, he and a friend were enjoying a campfire in the South Meadow, near the back pasture. They hadn't been drinking or taking any substances, and it was meant to be a simple night of relaxation. As the night wore on, they began hearing strange sounds emanating from the woods that separated them from the back pasture. It sounded like a large animal, perhaps a bear, moving through the woods. Curiosity got the best of them, and they approached the source of the sound with a flashlight in hand. When they reached the tree line, they saw something that defied explanation. In the beam of the flashlight, my father and his friend glimpsed a pair of yellow eyes and a mouth filled with menacing teeth. However, there was something unnaturally wrong about its appearance, especially the placement of its eyes and teeth. The snout resembled that of a wolf, but it was much larger than any wolf or coyote they had ever seen. In sheer terror, they turned and sprinted back to their truck. As they neared the vehicle, the creature let out an otherworldly howl that still haunted my father to this day. It was a sound that defied description, a primal, chilling call that sent them fleeing in terror. They sped away, their hearts racing, leaving behind a scene of pure dread. Despite these stories, I grew up dismissing them as mere ghost stories, convinced they couldn't possibly be true. That was until I had an experience of my own. When I shared these stories with my best friend during our visit to the farm, he couldn't believe we hadn't done more to investigate, mocking my skepticism. He challenged me to explore further. Little did I know that the night would take a terrifying turn. As we sat near the old barn, an eerie feeling descended upon us, as if the very air had turned sinister. At first, I brushed it off, attributing it to our nerves getting the best of us. But then the dogs owned by my cousins, who lived nearby, went berserk. Their frantic barking wasn't the usual display of aggression, but sheer terror. The dog pen was not far from us, obscured by darkness, and it became clear that something was desperately trying to breach the fence. We could hear the fence shaking as whatever it was attempted to force its way in or out. I initially thought it might be the dogs trying to escape, but I didn't want to be caught in the path of 3 terrified German shepherds, just as I was, about to suggest we leave. An indescribable sound pierced the night. It was a horrifying, bone-chilling sound that defied explanation, leaving an indelible mark of dread on my soul. We barely had time to react. We bolted into the car and sped away, gravel flying in all directions. The night's eerie events left a lasting impression on me. My cousins, who slept through the chaos, discovered the next morning that they had lost a dog, and the dog pen needed rebuilding. Local authorities attributed it to a coyote attack, but the sheer ferocity of the assault exceeded anything a pack of coyotes could accomplish. I firmly believe that what we encountered that night was something far more sinister. These stories, once dismissed as fanciful tales, had taken on an unsettling reality, and I was left with a haunting question: what malevolent force lurks on that farm? And what secrets does it hold? When I was 14, my parents made the surprising decision to transfer me to a private Catholic prep school. I wasn't thrilled about changing districts, and as a young teenager, making new friends felt like an uphill battle. A few weeks into the semester, however, I received an unexpected invitation from 3 girls I knew from my English class. They wanted me to join them for a sleepover. Now, I didn't really know these girls very well, but my mom insisted I should go to help me adjust to my new school. So, reluctantly, I agreed to attend. The sleepover was at the home of one of the girls, Jess. Little did I know that this night would be one I'd never forget. When I arrived, I met the girls, Zoe, Kathy, and, of course, Jess. They seemed friendly enough, and we started off with the usual sleepover activities. However, things took a strange turn when Kathy pulled out a set of tarot cards and a Ouija board. I had never played with a Ouija board before and considered myself a staunch believer in science and logic. I was sure it was nothing more than a board game based on a legend. But Kathy thought that, being a goth, I'd enjoy the experience. So, the 4 of us, Zoe, Kathy, Jess, and myself, gathered around the Ouija board in Jess's bedroom during the late afternoon. Right from the start, the board became incredibly active. I was heavily skeptical and didn't want to participate if the other girls weren't going to take it. Seriously, they assured me they were not messing around, and strangely, the board began spelling out things like hello and play repeatedly, even before we could ask it any direct questions. Finally, we mustered up the courage to ask if there was a spirit with us, and if so, if it had a name. To our amazement and growing unease, it responded with Hector. This was when Jess began to get anxious. She told us that when she was about 5 years old, she had a childhood imaginary friend named Hector. I was still skeptical, but I couldn't deny that this was getting creepier by the second. We decided to press on and asked Hector if he had any other spirits with him. To our shock, the board replied with a simple yes. We then asked if he knew their names. And without hesitation, the plankhead moved to spell out Murray. At this point, Zoe broke down in tears and refused to play anymore. We stopped the session to console Zoe, who was clearly shaken. It turned out that just 3 months earlier, her grandmother, whose name was Marie, had passed away from cancer. None of us had any way of knowing about this event, and it left us all in stunned silence. We tried to get Zoe to say goodbye to Hector, but she was too distraught to continue. Kathy, Jess, and I, however, decided to continue playing without Zoe. In hindsight, that was a grave mistake. The spot where Zoe had been sitting suddenly felt ice cold compared to the rest of the room, and the plankhead on the Ouija board kept moving on its own, changing places without us even touching it. Terrified, we hastily closed up the board, put it away, and tried our best to move on from the eerie experience. Later that evening, while we were all having dinner, Jess's 5-year-old brother began telling us about his imaginary friend, Hector. What made it even stranger was that his description and backstory for Hector were almost identical to his older sister's childhood imagination. We couldn't help but ask if he knew anything about his sister's imaginary friend, and to our surprise, he said he had no idea. All the paranormal talk eventually reached Jess's mom, who was understandably concerned. She quickly sent us home, and we were never invited back again. The events of that sleepover would forever haunt my memories, serving as a chilling reminder that some mysteries are best left untouched. About 2 decades ago, when I was just a teenager, a spine-tingling and bizarre incident unfolded within my family. It all started when my great-grandmother passed away, regrettably. We lived quite a distance away, in another state, and couldn't attend her funeral. However, a couple of weeks later, we embarked on a 2,000-mile journey to visit the remaining members of our family. Coming from a devout Catholic background, it was no surprise that my great-grandmother's home was adorned with all the typical religious paraphernalia, candles, statues, and numerous saints. Yet, amidst these sacred items, there was something peculiar blonde doll dressed in a striking blue gown, encased within a glass cabinet. As we settled into the family gathering, we soon learned an eerie tale about the doll. My aunt informed us that the doll's hair had been growing, and they had been meticulously caring for it, giving it baths, washing its tiny clothes, and even trimming its hair. But what sent shivers down my spine was the belief held by some family members. They were convinced that the spirit of my great-grandmother now resided within this doll. My mother, who was acquainted with the doll from previous visits, tried to persuade me that its hair had indeed grown. However, I remained skeptical. I closely observed the doll's hair, which cascaded slightly past her shoulders. Nothing extraordinary, just typical doll hair. A couple of years passed, and my grandmother expressed her desire to visit our out-of-state relatives once more. As soon as we arrived at our family's place, my curiosity got the better of me, and I made a beeline for the enigmatic doll. To my astonishment, its hair had significantly outgrown its previous length. Intrigued, I engaged in conversations with my family members about this peculiar doll. They shared unsettling stories, recounting how they had witnessed tears streaming down its porcelain face just a few days after our initial visit. To add to the eeriness, they had stopped cutting its hair because, apparently, that was my great-grandmother's peculiar preference. It's been a while since we last saw that side of the family, but we still hear from them occasionally. And the most unsettling part, the doll is still with them, its hair continuing to grow at an inexplicable rate. The entire situation remains utterly bizarre and unexplained. We've never received a satisfactory answer about the doll's origin, except for a vague suggestion that it might have come from Mexico. The chilling mystery of the doll, seemingly inhabited by my great-grandmother's spirit, lingers in the family's history, leaving us with more questions than answers, a tale that still sends shivers down my spine whenever I think about it. My mom's childhood in Venezuela, a place steeped in history and mystery. It all began during the tumultuous times of the Civil War. My grandpa, bless his brave heart, managed to escape the chaos and secure a small farm and some property in the bustling capital. This was around 1972 or 1973, and my mom was just a curious 8 or 9-year-old. Back then, radio waves ruled the night, and they had just splurged on a fancy no radio for their farm. It must have been around 11 or 12 at night, the time when most folks are fast asleep. Grandpa was snoozing soundly, but my mom was wide awake, immersed in the captivating world of radio shows. The night was warm, with a hint of mystery in the air, so most windows and the balcony were left ajar to welcome the breeze. My mom, growing drowsy, decided it was time to bid adieu to the radio for the night. She got up, made her way to the balcony window, and that's when it happened. Her heart nearly leaped out of her chest. There, lurking in the shadows, was a creature unlike anything she'd ever seen. It stood just a smidge shorter than her, hunched over behind a bulky sofa, its eyes like gaping voids. Almond-shaped and as black as the deepest abyss. Its skin was a ghastly shade of gray, like leather from the underworld, and its arms were grotesquely long, almost touching the floor. My mom's breath caught in her throat, and a scream erupted from her like an avalanche crashing down a mountainside. The creature, sensing her terror, panicked and lunged towards her. Grabbing her trembling arm, panic coursed through her veins, but she summoned all her strength to resist the creature's grip. In the nick of time, just as her strength waned, my grandma and grandpa came charging into the room. The little monstrosity, perhaps realizing it was outnumbered, released its grip and fled through the balcony, disappearing into the inky night before my grandpa could lay a finger on it. An hour ticked by, with my grandpa scouring the farm, but he found no trace of the creature. That night, they all huddled together in one bed, shaken to their cores, and vowed never to leave the windows open at night again. Now, here's the part that chills me to the bone. As a kid, I often thought my mom had cooked up this terrifying tale to feed my insatiable appetite for aliens and the supernatural. I figured it was just a spooky story, something to keep me entertained. But then, one night, curiosity got the best of me, and I asked my grandma about it. To my shock, she corroborated my mom's story, recounting her own chilling encounter with that same sinister creature. My grandma is as serious as a librarian during final exams, and she wouldn't spin such a yarn as a joke. Sadly, I never got to hear my grandpa's side of the story because he passed away shortly after I was born. Nonetheless, this tale has haunted my thoughts over the years. A dark mystery that refuses to fade into the past. It's a story that sent shivers down my spine as a child and continues to do so to this day. You won't believe the chilling experiences I had in the house I grew up in. We moved into that old brick house when I was just 2 years old and didn't leave until I was almost 17. While I've got a handful of eerie stories about that place, I'll start with the tale of the little boy's spirit. Picture this, a quiet cul-de-sac in a peaceful neighborhood, with my parents working second and third shifts. They often left me home alone. Starting when I was just 6 or 7, it didn't bother me much. After all, it was a safe neighborhood, and I was content playing video games and staying out of mischief. Little did I know that this house had a different vibe altogether. The house always had an eerie you're not alone feeling, even when I was the only one inside. I thought it was normal because I had lived there since I was a toddler. But things took a spooky turn when my 6th birthday rolled around, and my parents gifted me a cat. That's when I began to realize that things were far from normal. Our cat would often fixate on empty spots in the room, as if something unseen was captivating her attention. The strangest part, she would sit for hours at the end of a lawnwood hallway, staring down towards our rooms, even though no one was down there. One night, while my family and I were fast asleep, I was abruptly awakened by childlike laughter coming from beneath my bed. I might have been a brave kid, but that laughter sent me flying out of my bed in an instant. I rushed to my parents' room, my heart pounding, and recounted what had happened. Years later, they confessed that they were well aware of the presence of this childlike spirit for years. They claimed to have even interacted with him without any issues. He had a habit of turning on the VCR and playing whatever tape was in it. They'd hear him running up and down the hallway. When I was away at my biological dad's house for the weekend to spot him, wearing a little blue polo shirt, peeking around the corner while my mom did the dishes. But the night of the laughing incident pushed my parents to research how to help this lost spirit move on. They placed a lit candle in the middle of the hallway and an open Bible beside it. I'm not a religious person, so I can't say which passage it was. However, after that night, we never heard from the boy again, and we hoped he found the peace he sought. But even that didn't completely dispel the eerie feeling that the house harbored. The second entity was an entirely different story. It was more of a watcher, a silent observer. It never directly interacted with us, but occasionally, you'd catch a glimpse of a towering figure out of the corner of your eye. This shadowy man, about 6'3", would always be there, lurking in the background. It never felt threatening, but it sure was unsettling. When I turned 17, due to some financial issues, we had to leave the house behind. We were moving on, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were leaving the watcher to himself. I had just a few more days left of high school, and my parents were busy with the move. On the final night before we left, I decided to stay in the empty house. It was just me, my mattress on the floor, and my trusty old alarm clock, around 3:30 in the morning. I woke up to find those same shadowy legs right beside me. This time was different, though. Instead of feeling discomfort, I felt an eerie calmness. The room was silent, and I didn't hear a single noise. I shifted my gaze upward, trying to see the figure's face, but it melted into the darkness of the room. I took a deep breath and went back to sleep. when I shared this encounter with my parents. They confirmed that they had seen the shadowy man several times as well. It was almost as if he was a part of the house, a permanent resident we couldn't rid ourselves of. Fast forward a few years to when I was around 20, curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to take a friend to see the house I grew up in. The realtor sign still stood, and the house remained eerily empty. I ventured through the backyard, approached the back door, and to my surprise, it was unlocked. I pushed the door open and peered into the darkness of the house, but as soon as I stepped inside, an overwhelming wave of sadness and loneliness washed over me. It was unlike anything I had ever felt before. I couldn't help but imagine it was a mixture of seeing my childhood home so desolate and watches enduring feelings of solitude. I left immediately, shaken to my core. These days, an older couple resides in that house. I often wonder if they can sense the presence of the Watcher, the shadowy figure that watched over me and my family for so long. It's a tale that still sends shivers down my spine whenever I think about it, and it serves as a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying experiences happen within the walls of the seemingly ordinary places we call home. I've never ventured into the world of illegal drugs, not once in my life. It's not because I have some moral high ground. It's because my body's allergic reactions to nicotine and cannabis were enough to keep me miles away from anything remotely mind-altering. The closest I got to partying was getting embarrassingly drunk twice when I was just 14. And let me tell you, it didn't end well. I puked my guts out, and that was the end of my teenage rebellion. But here's where things take a decidedly eerie turn. I've always been the one in my group who attracts the inexplicable, the supernatural. Call it a gift or a curse, but my life has been a parade of paranormal experiences, far beyond what the average person might encounter. I've seen ghosts, no kidding, multiple times. And my dreams, well, they're like prophecy central. They foretold events. And I've had premonitions that make the hair on your neck stand up. It all started with a near-death experience when I was just 11. A brush with the other side seemed to open a door, one I never asked for but can't seem to close. Fast forward to a day about 19 months ago. I was cruising down the interstate in California, somewhere near Lebec, north of Los Angeles. I pulled into a truck stop, nothing fancy, but they had this quirky little movie cinema for truckers. And get this, it was free. The movie playing featured Brad Pitt as a tank commander during World War II. He spoke fluent German, and it was a gripping film. But there was one scene, a moment that sent chills down my spine. A tank ran over a man, crushing him, and right then, I had this flash. This horrifying vision that I would meet the same fate. I bolted out of that cinema, heart pounding in my chest. You see, my flashes, they're different from your everyday déjà vu. They come true. Every single one of them. It's like that movie Noah with Russell Crowe, where he has flashes of the world being flooded. Just like that, but shorter. Much shorter. Now, about a week later, I found myself in Lake Havasu City, Arizona. And mind you, I had this strange connection to that place. I used to gaze at it in my massive map book with all the country's freeways. No plans to move, there or anything. But I just couldn't take my eyes off it. And then, fate or whatever you want to call it, sent me on a job to drop a trailer off there. I parked my truck, engaged the parking brake, and thought I was all set. But then, I heard it, a dreadful hiss. That sound meant one thing. The air brake had disengaged. Panic rushed in like a tidal wave. I raced to the back to unlatch the trailer. My truck still in neutral, on a slight decline. My attempt to push the fifth wheel pin back in was futile, and I can't help but think how foolish it was. My foot got caught under a moving tire as the truck began to inch forward. In the moment, I thought, jump flat, anything to avoid that tire ripping my leg apart. The truck rolled over my left buttocks, left leg, and right foot and ankle. Two wheels crushed them as they went, snapping and popping, a gruesome symphony. I leaned as far to the right as I could, praying the truck wouldn't roll over my chest and head. It cleared me but continued its ominous journey. rolling another 50 feet until it collided with a fence. That crash, it was something out of a nightmare. I remember rolling over and catching sight of my femur bone, desperately trying to make an appearance through my torn skin. But here's the weirdest part, it wasn't painful, not even a little. I was in shock, that's for sure. Long story short, the paramedics arrived, and I was whisked away to Lake Havasu Regional Medical Center, where I would spend the next 8 weeks of my life. When I finally made it back to Oregon, it was with a walker, like a little old lady. My trucking company, they showed me the door, thinking I had been fibbing about the air brake. But let me tell you, I had engaged it. They couldn't convince me otherwise. In the hospital, they had me on morphine, which made me feel sicker than a dog, after much pleading. They switched me to something else, and the repeating dream stopped. You see, I was stuck in this loop, a dream that played over and over. A group of people under a tree, a scene straight out of 1940s France or Italy, but in vivid color. One man would read a newspaper, then dash off excitedly, and the rest would huddle, chattering. It was maddening, but during those dreams, I gained an eerie insight. I started to understand that everything that had happened and would happen had already occurred. Thousands, millions of times, and not just what had happened, but everything that could happen, in countless variations, an almost infinite number of times. Now, some might scoff and say it was all just hallucination, but the ancients would have seen it differently. To them, these visions were windows to another reality, not just the product of an overactive imagination. Take my friend, for instance. She was once terribly ill, feverish, and hallucinating. In broad daylight, she saw her husband's best friend's wife holding a menacingly large knife, coming at her with deadly intent. It wasn't just a figment of her fevered imagination. Years later, she learned the truth. This woman had despised her with a fiery passion, all hidden beneath a facade of friendliness. She wanted her husband for herself, and her hatred had been palpable, even in that hallucination. Scientists, they speculate about the quantum world, where all possible realities exist, and every imaginable outcome has already played out countless times. It's a mind-boggling thought, isn't it? A reality where nothing is truly unique, where our existence is but one thread in an infinite tapestry of possibilities. So, there you have it, my life's strange and eerie tapestry, woven with glimpses into the unknown, flashes of the inevitable, and a hint that perhaps our world isn't as straightforward as it seems. I recently started dating this incredible girl, and as we got closer, she dropped a bombshell on me. She confessed that she could see and communicate with ghosts, not occasionally, but every single day. I mean, I've always been intrigued by the supernatural, but this was like something straight out of a horror movie. The week before this revelation, she had come over to my place and, out of the blue, asked if there were any ghosts lurking around. To be honest, I'd felt an eerie presence in my house on multiple occasions over the years, so her question sent chills down my spine. She went on to explain that there were 3 distinct entities she had sensed. Firstly, there was one in the front living room. She believed this ghost had met its end right there and was desperately seeking solitude in the afterlife. Then, she mentioned another entity in my garage, although she wasn't entirely sure if it was a ghost. It seemed more like a pool of leftover emotions, anger, and rage, coalescing in one spot. Sort of like the Ghostbusters ghost containment unit beneath the city. Spooky, right? But it was the third one that sent shivers down my spine. She claimed that there was a ghost that had been with me on every one of our 6 or so dates. Yeah, you heard that right. This ghost was like my invisible date companion. At this point, I couldn't help but be skeptical. I mean, I'm not one to believe in psychics or anything supernatural, and I certainly didn't want to be tricked into thinking she was right. So, I decided to put her to the test. I started asking her a barrage of questions, expecting her to give me some generic, vague answers. But here's where things got seriously creepy. She began calling out specifics about this ghostly companion of mine. She mentioned the D-Ward leather wristbands, biker boots, and a sleeveless vest. She knew he had a green guitar amp that we used to ride motorcycles together. She even described his long hair and mustache. It was as if she had met him in the flesh, which was impossible because she knew nothing about this person. I used to know him when I lived in a completely different state. The truly mind-boggling part was when she described specific tattoos on his neck and upper arm. My girlfriend had never heard me talk about this person, and there was no way she could have seen any pictures or known about those tattoos. It was a complete logical impossibility. Then she dropped the bombshell. She asked me, did he shoot himself? My jaw practically hit the floor. I could only manage to reply with a shaky yes. She went on to give me eerie details about how these ghostly beings communicated with her and how they played a role in escorting the newly departed to the afterlife. She mentioned something about a black robe and a scythe. But the creepiest part was that there wasn't just one of them. There were several of these grim reapers. I was completely shaken. I'm an atheist, and I've always been a skeptic when it comes to the supernatural. But what she was telling me was something I couldn't just brush off. I'd only known her for a little over a month, and the way she described things about this mysterious person from my past, it was as if she had a direct line to the other side. About 16 months ago, a close relative of mine had passed away shortly after his death. All of his social media profiles were taken down. I reached out to his girlfriend and one of his best friends, hoping to find some pictures of him, but they couldn't find many, and most of the recent ones had vanished with his Facebook account. Here's where it gets even spookier. There were some brand new tattoos he had gotten right before he passed, and my girlfriend described them with uncanny accuracy, their shape, style, and exact positions on his body. There was nowhere online where I could find pictures of him with those tattoos before he passed away. It was like she had tapped into a hidden dimension of knowledge. Now, I live in Texas, but all of this had happened when I was still living in New York. There was no conceivable way my girlfriend could have ever seen him before, and she had never been involved in motorcycle riding like he was. She hasn't been able to figure out his name yet, but she's determined to get closer to me and to him, hoping to uncover more about this mysterious ghostly presence. And honestly, if she does find out his name, I'm not sure how I'll process it all. But one thing's for sure, this supernatural journey has taken me down a path I never expected to tread. In January 2012, I started boarding my horse at a creepy old barn nestled in a small, tight-knit, and somewhat friendly barn community not far from my home. This place had been standing since the 60s and was surrounded by dense, eerie woods. The barn complex consisted of 3 buildings, with the main arena entirely encircled by those ominous trees. Hidden in those woods were small trails that only added to the mystique. Fast forward to June 2012, and now I had 2 horses at this barn. I found myself there every single day without fail. From the PM until 10 PM, I diligently feed and care for my horses and even took the time to ride one of them every night. Our rides usually took place in the arena, but occasionally we'd venture into the barnyard. There were no fancy field or arena lights here. Our only source of illumination was the pale light of the moon and the shimmering stars. One evening, around 5 PM, I was sitting on my horse, letting her stand when she suddenly began snorting and backing up. I glanced around, and my blood ran cold. There, emerging from the woods, was a white-gray creature unlike anything I'd ever seen. Its head was eerily small and round, with empty, pit-like eyes. Its mouth was barely discernible, lacking any real detail. Its spindly arms and long fingers sent shivers down my spine, while its ribcage seemed unnaturally pronounced. Its legs, thin and lanky, moved in jerky, disjointed motions. It approached us with slow, erratic steps. To put things in perspective, my horse was a dead broke, calm, and well-mannered mare who had never spooked before. But on this night, she refused to go back into the arena. Bolting away in sheer terror, I eventually calmed her down, led her to the main barn, and rushed back to the arena. only to find nothing but faint footprints where I had seen the abomination. Throughout the summer, this entity became a disturbing presence. It would peek, almost dance, around the gate leading into the woods where the trails beckoned. Then, roughly a month later, at about 9 p.m., while riding in the front pasture under the radiant full moon, I saw the creature again. This time, it ran alongside my horse on the other side of the fence. I halted my horse, and it darted around the corner, vanishing behind one of the side barns into the woods. The woods always seemed to be its favorite haunt. Summer 2013 marked the shutdown of that barn due to the owner's passing. We moved our horses to a friend's place and, strangely, didn't encounter the creature there. Late in the summer and fall of 2013, I explored the woods directly behind the new barn and arena. This place was newer, equipped with bright lights, but it didn't deter the creature. About a month later, as I was preparing to leave, I heard eerie noises emanating from the woods. My eyes fixated on the barn owl, and there it was, the creature, sprinting down the road into the woods. I continued to spot it, though less frequently, mainly lurking in the shadows of the woods. Fall 2014 introduced me to a bizarre twist. I began seeing the creature in the back pastures, darting in and out of the tree line. On one occasion, I saw a second one sitting in my neighbor's yard, observing me as I rode. Gradually, these sightings grew more distant, less alarming. However, at the first barn, I went with the barn owner to a nearby pond. As I looked around, a monstrous version of the creature dashed out from behind a tree just 10 feet away. I was alone by the trailer, and it sent shivers down my spine. Then, in November, I found myself house-sitting for the barn owners. At around 2 a.m., I ventured into the back pasture to fill the water troughs and bask in the eerie glow of the full moon. As I sat there, 3 of those creatures emerged from the woods. One of them ventured close to the trees near the trough, while the other two walked along the tree line. The horses, blissfully munching hay, seemed unperturbed, though the situation was anything but normal. I immediately messaged the person who had experienced these creatures before and described them. Unnerving scene. Since that night, I haven't seen them much. However, last summer, I did spot one of them lurking outside my house, peering into the windows. And just a few weeks ago, I had another unsettling encounter. One of those creatures was outside my bedroom window, tapping and emitting a strange, faint shrieking sound that chilled me to the bone.